Well, welcome to another homebrew edition of Brews and Bread. Today we'll be looking at the boil. This is where we extract the bitterness and aroma and flavour from the hops and start making our beer. Well, let's go have a look and see how things are going on. Right, look.
Right, we'll get the boil started now. Tiny little sparge there just to try and get a bit more out of the grains. But now we'll put the heat back on. Always handy to maybe keep the thermometer in just so we know when we're getting up to a boil. You really want to watch this really carefully at this point. As it gets to a boil, there's a chance of what we call a boil over, which is where it will just go everywhere and create a massive mess. So it's really important that you just keep your eye on it, just to avoid any mess on the cooker top. But yeah, this is what your product at this stage will look like. You can see it's a nice clearish colour. What will happen now is as it comes to the boil, we won't put the hops in just yet, but we need to get to what we call the hop break, which is where the proteins that are still left in the liquid will precipitate out, and you'll see that as sort of a scum forming on the top of the wort. But as it stands, for now we're just trying to get up to 100 degrees, get it boiled, and then we can add our first hops in. So we're nearly at 100 degrees, hop break happened, try and clear a little bit, and then we'll add the first hops. The bittering hops, that's target. And this is what we call sort of a 60-minute addition. You count down from the total length of the boil to 0, and this is the 60-minute addition. So here you can see the hop break forming. This is where the proteins are sort of coming out and they'll coagulate. This is what you need to watch for, just to avoid any boil overs. While you're waiting for your boil, or after you boil and you've added your first hops and you've avoided the possibility of boil over, then's a good time to think about sterilising your fermentation bucket or your demijohn, wherever you're going to use to ferment your beer. So here's what I'd call a fairly good rolling boil. Here you can see it's starting to create a foam on the top. This is the hop break. Ideally you want this to sort of continue a rolling boil, and then most of the hop break will disappear as it kind of clumps together and falls down. But this is where you really need to watch over for a boil over. In fact, it might be a good possibility now to turn the heat down just so we don't have any mess. Looks like we've avoided a boil over, and what we'll do now is we'll get ready for our first hop addition now that it's boiling really well. So here we'll go with our first hop addition. It is worthwhile just making sure that you turn your heat down a little bit at this stage, because when you add the hops, it may cause a boil over to happen. So good practice would be to just turn the heat down, get those hops in, just make sure that there's no boil over when you add them, give that a chance to get in, make sure you're not carrying any hops left on your spoon, and then turn the heat back up to carry on with your boil. Now what you'll now need to do is obviously time for your next addition. If the next addition we're going to do now would be an hour from now, then you'd wait, time yourself for an hour, and then pop your next hops in. That would tend to be your sort of flavour. Flavour would go about maybe half an hour in. Aroma hops tend to go in sort of that last sort of 10 minutes or so. As I mentioned earlier, the Irish moss would go in probably around 10 minutes before the end. Just a tiny pinch, really, about a quarter of a teaspoon, probably around the 10-minute mark with your sort of aroma addition. But we'll time this now for an addition now 30 to 20 minutes for flavour, which is the hops here. Those East Kent Goldings, and weigh out another charge of hops for sort of the 10-minute mark to go in with the Irish moss. So based on the recipe we're doing today, there's going to be a 10-minute addition after the sort of 20-15 minute addition of 7 grams of East Kent Goldings. I'm just going to put in 2 grams of East Kent Goldings, which is hardly anything. Well, this is going to be aroma really, so should we go for, say, 4? It's only 5 litres of beer, so it doesn't seem that you're adding a lot, but it does make a bit of a difference. We'll go for 5. It's only 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes in before the end, so we'll go for 5 grams. Always worth having a look at your yeast, just make sure it's active, because obviously after this point when it gets cooled, there's not really a lot more you can do if you run out of yeast. But you can see here it has swelled. You might be able to hear it's fizzing, so that's definitely got life in it. So here we have the 20-minute addition going in. Again, just probably best to be careful just to make sure there's no boil over, that you want to just check the temperature. That's a good bit of practice. Again, just give it a bit of a quick stir, make sure they're all in. And we'll give it 10 minutes for the next one. I'm going to pop in the pinch of Irish moss now with the 10-minute addition, just so I don't forget. So I'll just pop it in the container that we've got the 10-minute addition in, and we'll get ready to put that in later. So here we have the last 10-minute addition. Get this in. It's got the Irish moss and the 5 or so grams of these Kent Goldings in, so we'll get that in. See the last addition going in. Give it a little stir just to try and dissipate the hops. Make sure we get good off acid extraction. There's nothing clumping together. You can see how the hop break has disappeared, and the Irish moss for the last 10 minutes is going to make a real difference to the clarity of that and stability. So soon we'll be hitting the final timer, which is the end of all the additions and the boil. It's reduced a lot in volume. We should be getting close to somewhere like 5 litres or so. Next stage will be to take this from here and get it cooled down as quickly as possible. You can do that a number of ways. You can put it in your sink with a lid on, with some ice blocks around it, or just cold running water. Giving it a stir from time to time with a sanitised spoon. Like I said earlier, they really want to make sure that the container you're going to ferment it in has been sanitised thoroughly, together with the stopper and anything else. But you do need to get it cooled down as quickly as possible. You can put them in large, sort of Nalgene bottles that have been sanitised, and seal the lid and leave them in a cool, very cold place. Or if you are prepared to take the risk, you can just cover the container as it stands now, put it somewhere cold like a garage overnight, and then decant it into the fermenter in the morning. But obviously there is a risk of contamination if the longer you leave it cooling slowly. I've done a number of various different ways of cooling it, and I've not really seen anything in the way of massive infections or flavours. But it's good to practice good techniques to avoid any possible contamination if you can. So there we can see it's reduced a lot. We're near the end of the boil. Only a minute or so left. It should be interesting to see how it turns out.
Well, thanks for watching Bees, Brews and Bread today on the Homebrewing edition. Like what you've seen and give it a thumbs up. Or perhaps subscribe to see the next episode when we'll talk about some fermentation. Thanks for coming and see you next time. Bye!